Hi, welcome to the Veteran Benefits Podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Deming. Today, we're going to be talking about what is service connection. We're talking about service connected VA disability benefits. What does it mean to be service connected? So, basically, the main thing to get VA disability benefits, you're looking at for whether or not something was connected, meaning caused by or began during your service. If you're active duty, if you're reserves, it's kind of a different story. But if you're active duty, it's anything that happened during your period of service. So it doesn't matter if it was. It doesn't always have to be combat related. It could be during a training exercise. It could be even something that happened while you're at home, but because you were on active service, or something that's a chronic condition that developed while were on active duty. So if you served for 25 years and during those 25 years you developed a chronic ulcer condition, it's not something that happened because you were in a rollover or exploded by an IED, but that's going to be something that's considered service connected because it began while you were on active duty. So the main things to look at, or the VA looks at when they're trying to determine if something is service connected, is obviously they want to know, do you have a current disability? So I sometimes have people ask me, well, I was exposed to stuff and I might develop this in the future. He doesn't care about what might happen in the future. I mean, they care as far as their treatment of the veterans, but in terms of giving you VA disability benefits, they're looking at, do you have a current diagnosed disability? Did something happen in service? Was there an in-service incident, exposure, something that can kind of that it could be linked back to? And then the third element is there a nexus or connection? You might hear that word nexus letter. Nexus means connection. So is there a connection or causal connection between what happened in service and your current disability? So they're looking at those three elements, and VA will look at evidence for each of those three elements to try to prove or disprove whether your current condition was related to service. So some examples that we'll see: hearing loss related to working on a flight line or being on the firing range and your rifle qualifications, or tinnitus. Those ones are going to be very clearly service connected. Obviously, some injury that happened in service, if you treated for it in service, that's going to be and it's chronic, you still have that injury. So if you dislocated your shoulder in a training exercise, and ever since then you've had arthritis and limited motion in your shoulder, that's going to be service connected. So there's multiple different ways to get service connection. So I want to go down the list and kind of talk through some of the different ways that people can get service connection. So the ones I was talking about just now, those are really direct service connections. So something happened in service, it caused a condition that began in service and it's continued since service. So it's a continuous disability. That's called direct service connection. Then we have secondary service connection. This is the next one I wanted to talk about. And that's kind of like the chain of events. So if you injured your left knee in service, that's very well documented. And then after that injury, you've always walked with a limp and you favor your right knee because of the injury to the left. And over the years, because of this limp, it's thrown your back out and it's caused conditions on the other side. That can be a secondary condition. Some other ones that we'll see, we often see sleep apnea, secondary to PTSD or some other conditions. So another common secondary condition that we'll see involves obesity as an intermediary factor. So if you have orthopedic claims, orthopedic conditions that prevent you from working out, and on top of that, you've got a service-connected mental health condition that causes you to eat your feelings and avoid wanting to be around people, that can cause someone to gain a lot of weight. Once you gain that weight, it can cause all sorts of stresses on your body. So you might develop diabetes, you might develop sleep apnea, you might develop hypertension or high blood pressure. So those would be secondary to the orthopedic condition. We also see people who have orthopedic conditions, arthritis in the knees, knee injuries, hip injuries, back injuries, and what does the military do? They prescribe Motrin, vitamin M, popping over-the-counter painkillers. That can really do a number on your stomach. So over the years, taking all those painkillers can cause you to develop gastroesophageal reflux disorder, indigestion, damage to the esophagus. So your initial injury in service was the orthopedic injury. You jumped out of a plane, you fast roped, you injured your back, your hips, your knees, took a bunch of pain pills. Now you've got stomach issues. That's a secondary service connection. We also have aggravation. So there's a few ways that aggravation can come into play. So if you have a condition that existed before you went into service, and this gets very technical because VA will sometimes say something pre-existed service, but they really need to show on your entrance exam that it was noted that you had this condition. If that condition got worse while you were in service, VA will pay you the difference between, they'll rate you for the difference between what it was when you entered service and what it was when you left service, or what it is now, basically, what the amount of aggravation. So one of the most common ones we see is aggravation of flat feet. A lot of people will go into the military with, they are diagnosed with flat feet, but it's asymptomatic. They've got no pain. They're perfectly fine. Physically, they've got no complaints. Then you go through boot camp, you're wearing uncomfortable boots, long distances, carrying heavy sacks. The arches collapse even more. Now it's painful. You've got to wear orthotics, taking pain pills, possibly even getting surgeries for them. That went from a condition that would have been rated 0% because you had no symptoms to a condition that's potentially a 30% or higher rating. So that's the aggravation. We can go into a lot of details about aggravation and what VA gets wrong when they're looking at aggravation, but that's the general principle of aggravation. The next way to service connect something is by presumptive service connection. And so this is where there's enough evidence and there's enough cases that VA sees people who were exposed to certain things or had certain types of service very frequently develop this kind of condition. And so they're not going to make you go through the process of getting a nexus opinion or proving that your current disability is related to service. If you had that exposure and you then develop a condition, they will presume that they're service connected. And the only way that the presumption can really be overturned, or that VA would deny something when it qualifies for presumption, is if there's clear evidence that it was caused by something else. It's very rare. So the most common one we see presumptive is Agent Orange related conditions. Agent Orange was a nasty chemical that was used mostly during Vietnam. VA has now recognized that it was also used in Guam and Thailand, along the DMZ in Korea around the time of the Vietnam War. There's a few other areas where Agent Orange was used. And so if you can show exposure to Agent Orange based on your military records, and then you develop any of the conditions that are on the list of presumptive conditions, which includes prostate cancer, it includes hypertension, hyperthyroidism, a whole bunch of other cancers. If you develop diabetes, Parkinson's disease, if you develop any of those conditions that are on the presumptive list, it's kind of an automatic grant. I say kind of because there's still room for VA to get stuff wrong, but theoretically, once you show your exposure to Agent Orange or tactical herbicides, then VA will presume that if you have one of the conditions on the presumptive list, it's going to be service connected. There's other areas and types of exposures that have conditions that are presumptive. Some of them include burn pit exposures. So you definitely want to look at that because it makes the whole process of getting benefits easier if one of the conditions you develop is on the presumptive list. The last way to get service connection actually is a little bit misleading because you're getting the same benefits as if something is service connected, but it's not related to service. It's called an 1151 claim, and it's kind of like a VA malpractice claim. But if you develop a condition or disability based on the care that you get at a VA hospital or VA facility, there's certain times where that disability from the VA care can qualify you for benefits. So if there's negligence or lack of duty of care from the VA provider, so essentially medical malpractice, then you can qualify for the benefits. The one that we see more often is when it's a result not reasonably foreseeable. So the type of things that don't get put on an informed consent, those would be deemed things that when you're getting your care, you're not expecting to come away with this specific side effect. We had a client who was treating on a VA facility and was exposed to an active shooter on a VA facility. If he developed PTSD from that incident, that would be considered a result not reasonably foreseeable from treatment that you're getting at a VA facility. Slip and falls, those would be things. And a lot of the kind of wonky side effects or like really out there side effects from certain surgeries or procedures. It should have been a routine XYZ procedure, but next thing you know, I've got lifetime disabling condition that came out of the procedure. Those kind of things, whether or not the doctor was negligent, we're going to look closely at those to see if we can get you VA benefits, disability benefits. It's not technically service connected, but you're going to get the same benefits as if it were service connected under Chapter 1151. And so the reason service connection is so important, I think it's often misunderstood. Veterans think that because you're a veteran, if you have a disability, VA is going to pay you. And so I've heard people say, well, VA prescribed me a CPAP machine. So, they're the ones that diagnosed me with sleep apnea. I don't know why they're not paying me benefits for it. But the piece that's missing from that claim a lot is the service connection piece. So what happened in service, or what's the secondary condition that's service connected that ties your current sleep apnea to your service? So just because you develop a condition later down the line, part of aging, part of the natural process of aging, or genetics, or after service exposures, just because you develop something down the line doesn't mean that it's connected to service. And if you are missing that service connection piece, VA is not going to pay you benefits for it. You might still be able to get health care at VA, you might still be able to get treatment for it, but the Veteran Benefit Administration is not going to pay you for it if it's not service connected. So it's really important to understand that piece and how to prove it. One of the some of the myths that we want to debunk about proving service connection, people will say, well, I served a long time ago. How are we going to connect it? Is there any way to connect my current condition to what happened in 1992 or 1968 or what have you? And I will say it's more challenging the more time that's passed between your service and the present, the more possibility that something intervening happened or that's just regular age related. But it's not impossible, especially if you're treating with a doctor. If you can document your symptoms over a period of time, if you have friends and family that can help you document symptoms over the period of time, we can often show that what happened in service is connected to and is at least as likely as not. So that's our standard. We don't have to prove beyond all reasonable doubt. We just have to kind of prove an approximate balance of evidence that your current condition is related to something that happened in service. So there's things we can do. Sometimes we'll talk to medical experts that can rule out intervening causes and help connect the hazards that you were exposed to in service to what you're experiencing now. It can be a pretty nuanced evaluation. So that's something that we as advocates look at very closely when we're evaluating a case. Another one is people will say, well, I never treated in service, so there's no proof that this developed in service. I guess I'm out of luck. And again, of course, that poses a challenge. The people who went to sick bay a lot and documented their symptoms, it's going to be a lot easier to show that you had that in-service incident that you can now connect your current disability to. But there's a lot of reasons, we understand there's a lot of reasons why veterans don't go seek medical care while they're in service. Sometimes it's kind of hazing or just the command culture or the command tempo. You can't pull away from your unit to go sick bay every time your stomach hurts, every time you have a little bit of a headache, you're going to self-medicate. People who have specialty pay, pilots especially, they don't want to be grounded and lose their specialty pay or lose the ability to be operational for their unit and for their teammates. So they're going to self-treat a lot and not go seek the medical care that they probably should have while they were in service. But that's not necessarily fatal to a claim. We'll be looking to get buddy statements. We'll be looking at your military occupational specialty. We'll look at other things in your record that can help substantiate your statements about what happened and what symptoms you are experiencing. So just because you didn't go seek medical care and service does not mean that you shouldn't file a claim. It's definitely still something that can be worked on and that can be proven. Again, remember that our standard is at least as likely as not. So it's approximate balance. VA will weigh the credibility, they'll weigh what you're saying and what your lay witnesses are saying against the types of duties that you would have had in your military occupational specialty or your rate. So they're looking at the full picture, and that's our job as advocates, is to help the veterans develop that story and develop the record to show what really happened in service. To sum it up, it's really important to understand service connection and understand that that's a piece that VA is looking at when they're deciding whether or not to pay you this monthly benefit for VA benefits. But if what we're talking about is interesting to you, or you think it might help a friend or a loved one, please like and subscribe. And if you have suggestions for future podcast episodes, please write them in the comments. Thanks so much for tuning in.